And welcome everyone. How y'all doing today? My name is Voice of Reason 467. Now, earlier today, or rather, guess I should back up. Really, I should say, um, as I've been noticing that there's been a bit of an issue with Christians attaching themselves to various different anime properties and trying to proclaim that they are biblical or this or that, especially with that of demons. So imagine my surprise when I wake up and the first thing see when I open Twitter is this. And so I decided I'd go ahead and go through this guy's account here just to see what his shit is like, and I find this shit. Yeah, so these people are gravitating towards this particular type of video here. And that kind of got me wondering whether or not I should go ahead and suss the sussiness of the video. So I decided to go and load it up here. And while I was setting everything up, while I was kind of getting everything ready here, because I had to make myself some breakfast, I figured it would be an interesting idea instead to expand it as, well, an overall assessment of his channel. Now, in case you haven't noticed on the tabs here, yeah, demons are bad actually. We're going to go ahead and start with this here, this video, and work our way over to this one. But we're also going to be assessing this video here and this video. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear here is I don't actually think that this guy is a chud. I've gone over his channel. I have also looked over his Twitter account, and it seems, at least to me anyways, this is just a regular Christian fan. Because there was a post on his Twitter where in which he responded to the whole thing about K-pop demon hunters songs being unchristian like, and he was saying actually K-pop demon hunters is very in line with Christianity, that kind of stuff, which makes me kind of believe that this is one of those Christians that appreciates anime in a normal fashion for its Christian references. But we're going to go ahead and assess the overall sussiness of the channel. Now, I'm actually kind of excited to get to these two here. Primarily because, well, I'm expecting these to be hot garbage takes. Yeah, no, you're not going to get me to support censorship. You're going to... But, I'll hear you out at the very least. Anyways, let's go ahead and see what he has to say.
Morally gray characters. I've noticed a trend in recent years where it's become generally accepted to give higher praise to stories if they contain morally gray characters. And though I understand the merits of including complex characters in your narrative and generally agree that characters who get the spotlight should, more often than not, be at least somewhat complex, don't you think it's a little odd how we so often equate a character's gray morality with depth? If you've ever watched or read One Piece, Naruto, or Full Metal Alchemist, allow me to try to break the paradigm. This is Monkey D. Luffy.
Before he starts getting into the details, I gotta say that is kind of correct. There are ways in which you can create a morally great character that's fairly vapid, primarily because it doesn't center on one way or the other. But as a general rule, when it comes to writing characters, having a character that's morally gray usually does come with it some depth. So I'm not too sure why it is that he's pointing to the exception rather than the rule, as if the exception is worth taking notice of over the rule.
Luffy is a warrior for freedom, a loyal captain, and a friend who habitually saves his friends from becoming their worst selves. He's not the deepest character, but he's not a surface-level goofball either. Hidden under his fun-loving exterior, we see a staggering degree of emotional intelligence and intuition. Further, he sees the political reality of the world around him for what it is and responds to it like no other man would, by staring it down and socking it in the face. Are you going to tell me that Luffy lacks depth just because he's by and large a strictly morally upright character? This is Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto's entire story is about conquering his demons, earning the trust of those around him, and saving his best friend. Naruto also grows, a lot. His growth is most evident during the Pain arc. Here, Naruto experiences the death of his master, the destruction of his village, the death of his other master, defeat at the hands of the antagonist, the apparent death of a childhood friend, total loss of control over himself, and the realization that his simple understanding of the way the world works would not suffice going forward. What does he do? He adapts. He strolls up to the main antagonist once the fight is over, admits to him the shortcomings of his worldview, and learns from him enough information to give an answer sufficient to change the mind of the most determined foe he'd ever met. Naruto did.
Now, I'll be honest, I haven't really watched One Piece or Naruto. Apparently, because One Piece is just so fucking long, you know? And not to mention, I kind of fell out of it when I was watching it as a kid, you know? There was just a lot of other stuff to keep up with. So, it was just hard to keep going on it. And it's like, now I'm just kind of going to wait for the series to end at this point. But, anyways, the other thing about Naruto is that I can't stand to watch the Naruto series. I mean, there might be a lot of great depth to it, don't get me wrong. But watching it as a kid was so annoying because there was just way too much fucking talking in the middle of scenes, of fight scenes, and various other things that were going on. It should have just been silent emotion or just letting people go. And primarily it wasn't just that. It was also the fact that they kept over-explaining everything. People kept saying that got better in Shippuden, but the fact of the matter is that they should redo Naruto, the original Naruto run. And I'm not going to watch Naruto Shippuden or skip Naruto because that's not how I watch anime. I don't watch any show out of order like that. I try to watch it from the very beginning if I can. Obviously, this is different from shows from like Star Trek, obviously, if you're fairly episodic in your storytelling. But overall, I don't think it's really a mark of greatness for an anime to, and it really kills my interest to actually involve myself with that anime when it's like explaining moves that are visually explained perfectly well without any at all like dialogue needed whatsoever, you know. And they just did it because the anime did it, I guess. Which, I mean, they just did it because the manga did it, I mean. So, yeah, that's why I'm not familiar with that character at all.
Didn't have to darken his morality to solve his
I'm
problems.
not going to say anything about these two.
Do you mean to tell me with a straight face that Naruto lacks complexity, that he has no depth? Allow me to provide one more example. These are Edward Elric and his brother Alphonse Elric from
Now we're talking. Oh yeah.
Full Metal Alchemist. Edward and his brother made a huge mistake when they were little that cost them greatly. They tried to revive their mother using alchemy, but they gave up nothing of equal value in return. Consequently, the ritual took half of Ed's limbs and Al's body in its entirety and created only the most crude and barely alive version of their mother they could have ever imagined. What they had unwillingly given up was the bare minimum and could never come close to the value necessary for recreating human life in its fullness. In that moment, they learned the value and the dignity of the human person and the full meaning of the law of equivalent exchange. It's because of this failure that the boys refuse to ever put aside the dignity of the human person. This is also the reason they're disgusted by Philosopher's Stones and refuse to use them. For in the Philosopher's Stone is found nothing but the unwilling sacrifice of innocent people, an equivalent price to pay for the power to create anything you want. They once wanted nothing but to get their hands on one, to restore their bodies without having to give up anything at all. But upon learning its secrets, they wanted nothing to do with this abomination. Ed and Al are morally upright because they know evil, because they've experienced the price of villainy, because they know temptations and shortcuts for the lies that they are. Do you see?
That is true to such an extent here, but it's also important to understand that their ability to be, that the grayness of their aspect of their character comes from the simple fact that they're willing to do things and fight in scenarios that most people would try to walk away or avoid nowadays. There's also the simple fact that in a lot of ways, Edward is willing to empathize with people who are very, shall we say, evil. Because he understands, you know, because when he comes to an understanding of the struggle, he kind of gets it. You know, in fact, if I remember correctly, Greed sacrifices himself at the very end of the show, and Greed is a very, very bad person. But Elric looks at that, and it makes him realize that he has to kill this guy, father. Otherwise, everyone else is going to die effectively. You know, the moral greatness comes from the simple fact that he's willing to also use his own means of understanding things to actually give an under. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with your take. I just have a different perspective. Is all. You know, there is a bit of greatness to the moral complexity of these characters.
Seriously mean to tell me that these characters lack depth? I think you get the point.
Okay, I get his point. His point is that morally righteous characters can still have depth and don't have to be vacuous. Which is like, okay, whatever. I don't think anyone really made that point. I had to blow my nose there.
Characters can be brought low, torn down, and built back up again. The way your character responds to this process naturally generates depth. Nowhere in this process is it necessary to sprinkle in some morally questionable choices. The fact of the matter is, these characters wouldn't work if they committed moral failings and either never acknowledged them or did but never regretted them. You could argue that these characters work like that because they're intended to be morally upright, that this doesn't apply to characters who were made from the ground up to be morally gray. So, fine. Let's look at intentionally morally gray characters and see how they fare. Let's begin with Light Yagami. Light attempts to impose his own sense of justice on the world by means of mass murder. He lies to everyone around him, sabotages his loved ones, alongside many other misdeeds that I won't get into so as...
Anyone describing Light Yagami as morally gray is retarded. Like, this guy has a strong sense of justice built around egoism, misconceptions of understanding of crime, and no societal analysis or systemic analysis whatsoever. Like, at all. Period. There's nothing there. Well, like, he may be a really good tactical person at not getting caught with the things that he's doing. But at the end of the day, he's a fucking dumbass. He's a moron. He's not morally gray. He's fairly straightforward. He just thinks people just think he's morally gray because, he's killing criminals. No, that's stupid.
As to not unnecessarily spoil the story for you. Despite all of this, Light does these things for what he believes are good reasons. This is all done in an attempt to create a more just society. Light is a morally great character, and, due to his intelligence, he's also a very complex character. But as for his depth, I don't think it's fair to say that Light Yagami compares to Naruto or Edward in matters of character depth. Next, let's look at Lelouch Lamperouge from Code Geass, also known as Zero. Zero styles himself a warrior for liberty and justice. He creates the Black Knights, a resistance group dedicated to fighting against Britannian oppression.
I am not familiar with that character at all, so... What was the anime again? I'll put it as a note here for animes I'm going to be watching, because I'm going to be going on an anime... I'm kind of going on an anime binge.
Or Edward in matters of character depth. Next, let's look at Lelouch Lamperouge from Code Geass, also known...
Alright, Code Geass, then. Yeah, I've heard about that one. There we go, okay. Code Geass. Okay. Code Geass. Anime mentioned to check out. Alright.
Known as Zero. Zero styles himself a warrior for liberty and justice. He creates the Black Knights, a resistance group dedicated to fighting against Britannian oppression, protects and cares for his sister Nunnally, and liberates Japanese areas under Britannian control. Conversely, Lelouch is also prideful, careless, manipulative, vengeful, fratricidal, and largely self-centered. Is deep? Certainly, but take a look at where that depth comes from. Lelouch is pulled between two worlds, peace and war, tranquility or vengeance, settling for what you have and pushing for more. His depth isn't due to his great morality, but rather to the contradictions playing out within him that he hopes to resolve. In one moment, he'll defend Nunnally with his life, and in the other, he'll put her in harm's way. Yes, to rescue her, but with serious and obvious risk to her safety. Lelouch seeks a resolution. He doesn't abide these contradictions within him. At one point, he almost accomplishes this, but unfortunately...
俺が本気で命令したら誰だって逆らえないんだ。俺を撃て。朱雀を仮にしよう。どんな命令でもね。もう変な冗談ばっかり。 本当だよ。例えば日本人を殺せって言ったら君の意思とは本当になる。まさか。
そうね。日本人は殺さなきゃ。
The evil within that Lelouch had fed for so long got the upper hand on the good he sought. See, the conflict in the first half of Code Geass is, as far as Zero is concerned, less driven by a morally gray main character, and more driven by the good and evil within him vying for control. The good hopeful, the evil underhanded.
That just sounds like the character is gray, but the conflict that's pushing him forward is black and white. I don't get this. I'm kind of curious how this is all going to relate to demons.
Finally, let's look at morally black villain. Mahito from JJK is morally black. Part of his death is due to his apparently simple outlook on his existence. He is a curse and he must act like it. The difference between a surface level curse antagonist and Mahito is that Mahito sees the other options. He understands opposing worldviews, and he rejects them. He brings out the best, or rather worst, in his fellow curses by acknowledging their higher ideals and telling them that ignoring their nature as curses is unnatural. For such a young curse, he's surprisingly wise. He doesn't just torment Yuji for funsies with no thought put into his methods. Rather, he identifies Yuji's ideals, motives, connections, and uses them to break him. These people make you hopeful? They're dead now. You save people indiscriminately? I kill people indiscriminately. It was fascinating seeing how deep Mahito's understanding of Yuji's psyche went and how well he understood what made him tick. Then there's Mahito's outlook on life based on his ability to perceive the soul and his unique
In case you couldn't tell, I'm not saying much because I don't really know anything about Jujutsu Kaisen. I haven't really watched it. Again, there's a lot of anime I'm trying to catch up on, and I'll get to eventually. But right now, I'm watching Rise of the Shield Hero and a few other things.
Perspective and attempt to understand it. Read it again for yourself. It's a pretty interesting set of pages. Finally, there's this constant growth. For the entire series, Mahito gets better and better at being a curse. At first, he settles for having this overpowered curse technique, Idol Transfiguration. Then, his ambition moves him to create a domain. After that, having fulfilled in his mind the purpose of his being, he unleashes a Black Flash. Afterwards, he unlocks a secondary form. Finally, he pulls off a split-second domain expansion that impresses even the likes of Sukuna, the main antagonist of the story. What a character, man. As he says, he's a mirror to Yuji. He's a perfect foil to our protagonist. They help each other grow as characters while moving away from each other on total opposite sides of the moral compass. Next, let's talk about Nagato Uzumaki, best known as Pain. I'll summarize his backstory. Nagato lost his parents and best friend to war. His mentor's answer to the problem of suffering was insufficient, so he created his own. He would force peace through a shared fear of himself. He would force unity by making himself a shared threat to all. Nagato had it all planned out, and Naruto didn't. The choice he gave Naruto was simple: let me have my way with my plan, or give me a better one. What Nagato failed to take into account, maybe because he chose to ignore it, is the cycle of hatred and violence that would inevitably form as he executed his plan. You might think Nagato is a morally gray villain because he shares similar traits to the aforementioned Light Yagami, but look again. Nagato's identity is pain. He wanted to force peace through pain, through suffering, through fear. One could argue that Nagato's plan was a mask for executing vengeance on the nations that made him suffer, by forcing them to suffer in kind. His peace wouldn't be real.
I would not at all describe that character as gray in any fashion. He's pretty fucking evil for all intents and purposes.
Peace. He didn't want to get rid of conflict, only war. It was selfish wish fulfillment, a way to redeem the hardships of his past, which Naruto had to break him out of by offering a real solution, an image of true peace. It was this new way of bringing about peace that awakened Nagato to the reality of what real peace was and how good it could be. Nagato sees the light only after Naruto shows it to him, but he didn't know it during his career as Pain. In other words, Nagato can't be morally gray, because there was no white to brighten his black. You've read the title of the video. Now's the time I begin to talk about demons.
Finally, man, it took you 10 minutes to actually get to it.
Let's get it out of the way. Although belief in evil spiritual forces is common to human religion across the world, the concept of demons that manga and anime tend to take inspiration from is Christianity. The whole concept of the show, Seven Deadly
Okay, I'll let him come.
Sins, from its title to its protagonist's flaws to its antagonists, is all taken from Christianity. Stories that feature the devil or the to its the whole concept of the show, Seven Deadly Sins, from its title inspiration from, is Christianity. World, the concept of demons that manga and anime tend to take inspiration from is Christianity.
So I had to go back because I wasn't sure what the show was that he mentioned there.
The whole concept of the show, Seven Deadly Sins, from its title to its protagonist's flaws to its antagonists, is all taken from Christianity. Stories that feature the devil or the demon lord also draw their inspiration from Christian demonology.
First of all, Seven Deadly Sins doesn't take from Christianity in the ways in which you're talking about when it comes to that, okay? They use names and references to they use Christian names and references and various other things that were developed by Christianity, such as such as Camelot, for example, you know, and the concept of angels and so on, you know. But here's the thing here: Seven Deadly Sins, the sins themselves, they're good people. They've actually been framed by the Holy Knights. I mean, what the fuck? Seriously? Not to mention, we find out very clearly, and when it comes down to it, demons. The only reason why demons are bad, in a lot of ways, is because they have a very fucked up leader. That, for the most part, doesn't give a flying fuck about anyone but himself, but because of his power, everyone is forced to obey him. He's a tyrant. We don't really know anything about the fucking leader of the angels at all. I think that they pretty much they're called the goddess race from what I can recall, but I think they're extinct. I think they've been sealed away. I don't know. It's kind of difficult to say because there hasn't really been much information on that. The point I'm trying to get at here is that names and references towards Christianity are completely fucking relevant as inspiration if all they're doing is the names and they're then taking them in a completely different direction. Like Escanor, the Son of Pride. Sure, he's prideful as fuck, but he's also very much a good guy, wanting to find acceptance for who he is, and realizing that he's deeply in love with Merlin. You know, will do anything for her at any point in time. But his Sin of Pride is because of his power. He considers himself the absolute strongest, and it kind of warps his personality a bit. You know, Escanor, the Sloth. So Sloth, I forget what his name was, but he's not lethargic at all. He doesn't represent anything at all with the sin of being slothfulness. It's like, in fact, his whole personality is that he's trying to have a better understanding of humans and of other people, you know, and of emotions, and he's basically a Pinocchio type character. It's like, what are you talking about? There's inspiration, and then there's taking the names and running with them in a different direction. So yeah, no, you're completely off base.
The same also applies to characters straight up named Lucifer, the Devil, Beelzebul, and a whole host of other demonic titles, despite their inspiration.
I don't remember Lucifer or Beelzebub being in the Seven Deadly Sins. What the fuck are you talking about?
The authors of these stories employ a degree of creative license that often leads to a portrayal of demons, which differs significantly from their theological origins.
They're not taking from the theology of Christianity. You should know this. They're taking from the spiritual conceptualization of demons that is prevalent within the East because it's anime. Demons are not universally evil in the East. In fact, among a lot of religions, they are not Christianity, or at least the Abrahamic faiths, anyways. Demons aren't really universally evil. They're just creatures of an otherworldly nature. Demons. What?
Regularly diluting the seriousness of evil and moral culpability as understood in Christian theology.
How? How? Just because they take Christian names and actually, run them in a completely different direction, or take Christian concepts and make them morally gray to the point in which not all beings are truly evil, that doesn't. Like, what? Look, demons aren't fucking real, right? They're a concept. They're an idea within the historical and cultural framework of us. Sometimes they represent evil, sure, but most of the time, for a lot of other cultures, they're meant to represent primal natural forces. They're meant to represent notions of morality that are alien to us, that are hard to grasp and understand. Orange and blue morality, effectively, is what I'm talking about. How you come across the idea that these anime are taking they're taking names from Christianity, running in their own direction with it, doing their own thing from an Eastern perspective, and then come to the conclusion that it's diluting the seriousness and evilness of and teachings of evil about in Christianity. Like, what? How do you get that? How do you get from point A to point B? Because I'm not seeing it.
Here's just a few examples. Rin Okamura, the son of Satan, rejects his demonic heritage and chooses to fight against his father and his demon army. Nezuko, from Demon Slayer, retains her humanity and fights against her demonic urges to protect her brother and others. The Devil, from The Devil is a Part-Timer, is portrayed as a hard-working and caring individual. Pochita, from Chainsaw Man, is a cute little dog devil that sacrifices himself to protect. Son of Satan rejects his demonic heritage, and here's just a few examples. Rin Okamura, the son of Satan, rejects his demonic heritage and chooses to fight against his father and his demon army.
I thought so. He didn't actually say the name of the anime.
Nezuko, from Demon Slayer, retains her humanity and fights against her demonic urges to protect her brother and others. The Devil, from The Devil is a Part-Timer, is portrayed as a hard-working and caring individual. Pochita, from Chainsaw Man, is a cute little dog devil that sacrifices himself to save the protagonist Denji. Power, from Chainsaw Man, forms a bond of friendship with Denji. Meliodas, from Seven Deadly Sins, is shown to genuinely care for his loved ones. Akira, from Devilman Crybaby, fights evil with the power of demons. Genuinely care for his loved ones. Akira, from Devilman Crybaby, fights evil with the power of demons.
Did he say Devilman Crybaby? Hold on.
Shown to genuinely
Yeah, okay, Devilman Crybaby. I wasn't too sure if that was the case.
Care for his loved ones. Akira, from Devilman Crybaby, fights evil with the power of demons. Before any of you start trying to play devil's advocate, I should point out, I'm not the one who brought up demons. These shows deliberately chose to use and abuse this concept.
They're not abusing the concept. The concept isn't fucking... First of all, how do these characters, being interpreted from an Eastern lens, from a non-Christian perspective, dilute the seriousness of evil in Christianity, of the concept of evil in Christianity? How?
I'm not the one who made the enemies in Demon Slayer demons. The author did. You could have called them vampires or something, because that's what they actually are. I didn't make Meliodas the son of the Demon King. The author did. I didn't make Power or Pochita demons. The author did. All I'm doing...
I'm sorry, but the majority of those shows that you mentioned aren't even taking inspiration from Christianity. The only one in there is Seven Deadly Sins, and they're just taking the names of it. That's it. That's all they're doing. They're just using names. That's all. Demon Slayer isn't even referencing Christian demons. I'm pretty sure Chainsaw Man, what are the other ones? Chainsaw Man and Devilman Crybaby aren't even referencing Christian conceptions of demons at all either. What? Sorry, you're failing to prove the fucking point. What is the point here exactly?
Is calling this practice what it is, a misappropriation of my religion. Some might object.
It's not a misappropriation of your religion because Christianity doesn't have the exclusive rights to the concept of demons. For fuck's sake, demons existed in the Greek religion for like many, many years ago, and they weren't all evil. What the fuck? Seriously?
That I should just shut up and write my own manga where the demons are all evil if I'm so hung up about this. Sure, let's see how stories like these fare. Enter Freerin, Beyond Journey's End.
Of fucking course.
The demons in Freerin are objective.
Okay, let's go ahead and put this down here, shall we? Okay. Okay, now let me go ahead. Just reading some of this stuff off here real quick. Now some of this shit is just like full on. Okay, I get what's going on here. Some of these people, more or less, some. Get back to that point there. Hold on.
The demons.
Okay, now let me go ahead and comment on a few of those on those screen caps here for a second. First of all, my understanding of the Freerin demons is that they're just animals. They are animals in the sense that they are highly predatory and highly magical. And in many ways, they are also very, very isolated. They don't have any social networks to keep going. They don't have any form of culture. They just eat. And they will use words and ideas that they don't really understand as a means of luring people in so that way they can consume them. Mostly mages, for the most part. Now, what I understand, and I could be wrong on this, so please go ahead and feel free to correct me, and let's see if there's anyone in the, no, there's no one in chat there, so. In fact, let me go ahead and take this off here, quick, hold on. Just give me the chat, screen since there's no one here yet. So, I may be wrong in this, so feel free to correct me if you want anyone watching to this point here. But, when Freerin was adventuring with Himmel, and she was going around with that initial party there. They ended up fighting the Demon Lord. And from what I understood, or from what was communicated via various different social media forums that kind of came across my feed on, is that the Demon Lord apparently wanted to live peacefully with humans, but didn't really know how to go about that. In other words, like apparently he was using. I don't recall the exact details of it, but I guess he was apparently using death and destruction and a means of fear uh, to showcase this. That I don't know the exact details because I haven't really bothered looking into it because I haven't really read the manga. But this more or less indicates to me that when it comes down to it, demons can be highly complex creatures. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they actually understand things as we do. Um, so there's definitely some room for exploration on what demons actually are. But the thing is that demons are just predators. They're just animals, effectively. They're animals in the sense of like if birds were more carnivorous than they actually are, and were capable of mimicking human speech, and they would mimic the human speech to lure us in, to then ambush us and kill us. That's what demons are. They're not evil in the sense that they're malicious, or that they take sadistic glee and pleasure in what they do. At least so far in the anime. It might be different in the manga, but I don't really know that. So, but they just simply do it as a means of surviving, as a means of eating. They have no concept of object permanence, for example. So yeah, let's see what you have to say here.
And Freeman are objectively evil. They're lying, cunning, manipulative, murderous predators who have no shred of empathy for mankind. It's perfect. Our protagonist, the titular Freeman.
Let's check out this description.
The demons in Freeman are objectively evil.
Objectively evil. In order for something to be evil, it has to carry some form of malicious intent. So no, they're not evil. Sorry, they're not objectively evil. Malicious intent defines quite a bit of what we would describe as evil.
They're lying, cunning, manipulative, murderous predators who have no shred of empathy for mankind.
None of that makes them evil, because there are a lot of animals, and the animal kingdom in general could be described in that particular way, because there's a lot of animals that use deceptive tactics in order to lure their prey into complacency, or in order to lure their prey into their grasp, so that way they can go ahead and get it. I mean, just because I think you don't understand it because you think that they understand because they're saying words that they actually understand them, but they don't.
It's perfect. Our protagonist, the titular Freeran, is unashamedly hostile to demons. In no uncertain terms, Freeran hates demons and tells us that they're evil.
Freeran doesn't hate demons. At no point in the anime does she actually describe them as evil. She describes them as animals. She says it's pointless, absolutely pointless, to engage with demons in terms of communication, because they don't understand anything. They refuse to, and that's. It would be akin to, for example, trying to carry out a conversation with a parrot. They're not actually understanding any of the words that they're using. They're just mimicking it.
Now let's see the reactions on social media. Ah, right, yeah. People were upset that demons were depicted as, well, demons. You know, the objectively evil, unchangingly malevolent opponents of mankind.
No, people were. This is such a smooth brain take based on the whole screen caps that he showed here. This is not what people are upset at. Okay, they're upset at because they have a misconception that demons are actually people in Freeran. They've been conditioned to think that any form of view of demons beyond the primordial, there are physical beings that can communicate with us, life and death, and all that stuff. They believe that they have the same morality as us, and they're just another race. In fact, a lot of this has to do with fantasy tropes that have inculcated in a lot of people's minds into believing that demons are just another fantasy race. That's what this is. People not understanding that that's not what demons are. But this idea that, oh, they're upset because demons are portrayed as objectively evil because that's what they are. Like, that's such a smooth brain take, for one, and two, it's objectively incorrect because Freeman doesn't actually portray these demons as evil. They portray them as animals, for fuck's sake. That's it.
The reaction to Freeman's depiction of demons is split between those who'd argue it's wrong to depict a whole set of living sentient beings as wholly and entirely evil to the core, and those who don't find it morally objectionable but think it's boring, lazy, or meaningless. To the former objection, I'd reply that this only makes sense if your framework for what constitutes sentient beings is exclusively informed by humanity. You assume there can't be objectively evil sentient beings because the only sentient beings whose existence you acknowledge are humans who are not objectively evil. Even this view is suspect.
What? Let me listen to that again. That didn't make any fucking sense.
Find it morally objectionable, but think it's boring, lazy, or meaningless. To the former objection, I'd reply that this only makes sense if you're people were unchangingly argue it's wrong to depict a whole set of living sentient beings as wholly and entirely evil to the core, and those who don't find it morally objectionable, but think it's boring, lazy, or meaningless. To the former...
Okay. So one is mistaking the demons as if they're sentient like we are, which they're not. They don't understand structures like they're not even curious about the meaning behind the words that they use, even like mother, father, family. They're not even curious about these words. They just know that these words mean something to humans, so they use them as a means of getting us to lower our guard. Do you not see that is... Do you not see that's the issue there?
Objection, I'd reply that this only makes sense if your framework for what constitutes sentient beings is exclusively informed by humanity. You assume there can't be objectively evil sentient beings because the only sentient beings whose existence you acknowledge are humans who are not objectively evil. Even this view is suspect because human beings are fallen creatures who, while still possessing the ability to do good, have a tendency toward evil without grace. This is what naturalism does to the...
Wait, what? Doesn't make any sense. It's a bunch of incoherent psychobabble. It's not even in reference towards what was said.
To the former objection, I'd reply that this only makes sense if your framework for what constitutes sentient beings is exclusively informed by humanity. You assume there can't be objectively evil sentient beings because the only sentient beings whose existence you acknowledge are humans who...
Okay, it took me a bit just to get that because I couldn't quite understand what he was saying there because... so yes, that is correct though. That is correct in some sense, but when it comes down to it, like, that's not the problem here. The problem is that they are mistaking their sentience as our sentience, which they're not. They don't have the same sentience that we do. That's pretty obvious given what we've seen in the show. But you're not even taking that into factor there.
Who are not objectively evil. Even this view is suspect because human beings are fallen creatures who, while still possessing the ability to do good, have a tendency toward evil without grace. This is what naturalism does to the average consumer of fiction. It gives them an incomplete picture of reality, a deficient framework from which to analyze the media they consumed.
That is so fucking... Oh man, this is like the epitome of projection here. You are literally ignoring the simple fact that the portrayal of demons is a very secular one. So far from what I understand of the anime and everything involved with demons, indicates that they're not evil. not in any actual objective sense. Animals aren't evil. So I don't get, and this idea that naturalism creates a deficient worldview when in fact your idea of demons is quite literally exclusive to Christianity, and you think that all conceptions of demons are defined by Christianity because people use Christian concepts and ideas. I mean, no, man, no. You this idea of saying that naturalists are have a deficient worldview is basically you just projecting out your own insecurities there.
If you were to look beyond the scope of humanity in the natural world and gaze into the supernatural for a moment, you'd find that
There is no supernatural. Supernaturalism doesn't exist. It doesn't. There's nothing there. Nothing. Supernaturalism cannot exist. Because in order for supernatural to exist, we would be having any form of documentation of it that's in any way, shape, or form credible beyond the schizophrenic ramblings of religious psychopaths and fucking demagogues, as well as people with delusional schizophrenia and all kinds of other mental issues that we've kind of identified when it comes to the belief in the supernatural as an actual real thing. Like, I'm sorry, but if you believe that the supernatural world actually exists and is capable of harming us in any fashion or another, you're crazy. You're fucking crazy. That's just all there is to it. There is no reason for you to believe that whatsoever. The thing is that you saw a bunch of fucking magician tricks, got hyped up, and thought that they were real. Or you were raised in the idea that that was the case, and so you think it's real, but it's not. None of it's real.
there are both objectively good and objectively evil sentient beings. Traditionally, we refer to these as angels and demons. If you acknowledge their existence and what their nature truly is, you're better able to digest not only the idea that
The very idea that angels are objectively good when they're capable of committing genocide of an entire fucking town by and large within the Christian Bible, or oftentimes will lead humanity down a path of temptation to test their fucking faith, and as a result cause them to actually fucking fall. The angels will actually cause people to fall within the context of the Bible. I don't know if you realize this, but that's the entire fucking point of Lucifer in the Old Testament. In fact, what you identify as Lucifer in the Old Testament, his actual Hebrew name is Hasatan, meaning, quite literally, it means. Sorry, I knew this at one time before, but basically, he's an angel that tests your faith. It means to test one's faith. So, it's like, if an angel is capable of leading a human being down to the path of evil in which they would in which they would normally never actually do so if they hadn't actually been tested by the angel, isn't the angel, technically speaking, responsible for bringing evil into the world? And therefore the angel isn't objectively good because he's sowing objective evil in the world? Like, you see what I mean when this idea of objective evil, good and evil, in terms of supernaturalism, is incoherent and psychobabble bullshit. Yeah.
a group of objectively evil sentient beings exists, but also that it's not morally objectionable to state this plain fact. To the latter objection, well, it's interesting, isn't it? The standard, the status quo, the thing people are used to, are the morally gray demons, not the morally black. Plainly evil sentient demons are foreign to the mind of the average anime viewer because of the prevalence of morally gray demon characters. The evil ones haven't really been given the chance to shine as antagonists for a long time.
That is true. I'll concede that. That it is very, very true. But the reason why I think that people gravitate towards that shit so much and they find it uninteresting is because notions of just purely malevolent characters are just have just been a staple for a lot of human history, going back hundreds and hundreds of years, with the inception of Christianity and their attempt to label anything they want as good, and anything that opposes them as evil.
While the Grey Ones have been getting story after story, developing the concept and exploring it in depth, often through the vehicle of protagonists. We see the world through their eyes, the justification of their morally questionable choices from their standpoint, and the effects that the consequences of their actions have on their psyche and their bodies. In a very real sense, we're conditioned to sympathize with them. The reality is that for as much as we like the term, many morally questionable choices go very much unquestioned by us, the audience. Looping back to the opening, we tend to equate gray morality with death. I would suggest that one of the ways we do this is by projecting our own personal death onto the characters that we watch in the form of expectation. What I mean is this. It might be the case that most people live a morally gray lifestyle, and are therefore more willing to see the death in gray characters because this death is more easily recognizable to them, and therefore seeing requires less effort than that of morally white or black characters. So when the character archetype of the demon is presented to us in a story as objectively evil and unjustifiable, after having watched and read so many stories where they're morally gray and very much justifiable, we recoil. This isn't how it's supposed to be, we think to ourselves. This is boring. I don't see the relatable challenges the Grey One suffered. This evil one is alien to me.
This is all very fair. I'm not at all like going to dispute this, because we are kind of conditioned to accept the things that are more familiar to us and the things that are foreign to us, you know.
We see our own challenges, which in themselves contribute to the forming of depth in the human person, reflected on the Grey characters, which we then naturally assume are deep as well. But my question is this: do you have to relate to demons? Think about it for a second. The ordinary understanding of demons is that they are categorically different from humans on a metaphysical level. They're just not like us. They don't think how we think. They don't value what we value. They don't have human souls, human brains, human bodies, nor human emotions. So why do we have to be able to relate to them? Why do the...
This is so fucking telling. This is so fucking telling whatsoever. The very idea that you can't relate to things that aren't human, that don't have your values and aren't this and aren't that or whatever, that aren't anything like you. The very idea that we can't relate or sympathize with things that aren't like you is just... what? You can't do that as a person? This is literally a means of justifying dehumanization by and large. Now, in order for dehumanization to actually exist, there has to be, you know, something being pointed to as human to then dehumanize. So yeah, I don't.
These other...
This is very sussy logic. Gotta say, kind of wondering if this guy is trying to build up for a grift here, given this simple fact. I mean, I came in thinking that this guy was fairly normal, but now I just think he's retarded.
Worldly forces have to be understandable to the human psyche on its own terms.
Hold on.
Human souls, human brains, human bodies, nor human emotions. So why do we have to be able to...
By the way, the things that he's talking about are so fucking telling, because they're so superficial.
They're just not like us. They don't think how we think. They don't
think how we think. So we should not develop any kind of form of understanding of the way they think, so we can communicate, so we can bridge that gap and communicate it.
value what we value.
So we shouldn't try to understand why they value what they value and try to bridge that gap?
They don't have human souls, human brains, human bodies, nor human emotions.
Yeah, because they're not human. But, like, it doesn't mean that we can't sympathize with them. Animals, other animals that exist out in the world, they're not like us. They share those same characteristics, yet we sympathize with them. We understand that they have emotions. We understand that they have feelings. We understand that a lot of animals, at least some mammalian animals, are very capable of complex emotions and an expression of those emotions. Everything of what you said is true, not just of demons, but also of other animals too. So what? Do you kick a cat around because you think it's evil? No. This is retarded logic. This makes no fucking sense.
So why do we have to be able to relate to them? Why do these otherworldly forces have to be understandable to the human psyche on its own terms and through its own ordinary experience?
Because it's fun to relate to shit that's not you. Because it's actually interesting and helps us develop our psyche. What is this nonsense?
I think this expectation on our part, an expectation that storytellers acknowledge and want to meet, is mistaken. Further, just because you can't relate to a character doesn't mean they're not deep. I know I certainly can't relate to Naruto. I'm not an orphan, I was raised in a loving home, I had good and loving friends, nobody despised me, my best friend isn't turning evil before my eyes, and I don't have a demon fox inside of me. Yet Naruto's death is evident if you're willing to see it. As we've explored before, through the examples of Naruto, the Elric brothers, Mahito, and Pain, character depth isn't determined by which shade of gray matches a character's morality. You can give morally upright and
Okay, this video is retarded. Yeah. Let's check out some of these comments here. Just trying to assess the sussiness of the comments section. Ah, interesting. Okay. Seems like this guy's getting some significant backlash to that in some regards, you know. Yeah. Alright, I guess this makes a lot of sense in this. Alright, now let's go ahead and delve into the actual video that spawned this stream. Now, I want to go ahead and talk about the simple fact that when it comes down to it, I do watch a lot of anime, and I have noticed that church institutions and church organizations tend to have an issue with being portrayed as, shall we say, problematic. They're usually corrupt or greedy, and there's very little distinguishing in between. However, I think that the reason for this has to be acknowledged that church institutions for a very long time, and even more or less recently in the exposition of that history, have been extremely fucking corrupt and extremely fucking prejudicial and extremely abusive for a very long time. And it's been becoming even more of a problem when you take into account that there are church organizations out there that are just really fucking malevolent as all hell. That some of them just revel in the suffering of others. And that's a problem. Because a lot of these people, because a lot of these churches, these mega churches, these church group organizations that prop up to promote bigotry, these missionary groups that go around holding entire villages hostage by forcing them to listen to the liturgical fucking teachings and theology in order to actually get fucking fed. And but by the way, what I'm describing isn't so much that they've taken a village and holding it hostage and doing it bad. I'm saying that they're holding them hostage by saying that, oh, you want food? Well, you've got to go ahead and listen to what we want to say about your lifestyle and our theology and whatnot in order for you to actually eat. No, fuck that. You feed them first. You feed them first, and when they're full bellies and they have and they actually have an appreciation for you, then you teach them. Because they're just... And a lot of these missionary groups that do shit like this, they're teaching bigoted bullshit. They're teaching racism. They're teaching fucking bigotry against homosexuality or against trans people, against all kinds of other groups and whatnot. You know, promoting forms of persecution, all kinds of shit. You know, Uganda is a primary example of what it is I'm talking about. So yeah, the only reason why anime portrays the church as a huge problem, typically speaking, is because churches in our world are a fucking problem, typically speaking. I mean, the most egregious examples of religious corruption come from the Christian church. It's not that hard to understand there. Let's see if his take on anime having a church problem is equally as retarded as his comments about demons.
Anime kinda has a church problem. I've picked up on a pattern and I want to know if you've seen it too. I'll be watching an anime, taking in the characters and the setting, and then bam, evil church. And I think, huh, that's a funny coincidence. But then I put on another show and again, bam, evil church. Bam, evil church, bam, evil church, over and over, and I start to think to myself, something's up here and I've got to talk about it. Now, I'm no anime amateur, but when doing research into this video, there was a surprisingly large amount of anime that have this exact issue. Full Metal Alchemist.
By the way, I want to go ahead and go back to one of the examples here.
Evil church, bam, evil church.
That example, that's from the Rising of the Shield Hero. That church isn't Christian. It's not referencing Christianity. It's in fact, it's the church that worships heroes that they summon from other worlds. In other words, very heretical towards your Christian faith. So, and kind of in a way a bit secular. I mean, come on. You would think that you wouldn't use this example since you hate naturalism so much in such a retarded fashion that projects your own insecurities, but whatever.
Large amount of anime that have this exact issue. Full Metal Alchemist Father Cornello, Ascendance of a Bookworm's Cathedral, Attack on Titan's Church of the Walls, Fate's Fuyuki Church, and Fire Force's Holy Soul Temple, just to name a few. They are corrupt, have ulterior motives, or in some cases are entirely on Titan's Church of the Walls, Fate's Fuyuki Church, and Fire Force's Holy Soul Temple, just to name a few. They are corrupt, have ulterior motives, or in some cases are entirely built on lies. So what gives? Why are there so many evil churches spread throughout the medium? I've come up with 3 different probable reasons to explain why this is happening, and I intend to set the record straight.
If your reasoning doesn't at all translate, talk about, if your 3 reasons don't at all talk about the church being a huge fucking problem today and historically speaking, then I'm just not even going to bother continuing with the other 2 videos. I'm just going to assume you're retarded.
The first reason, and probably the most fundamental, is what I call God as a problem. It's a pretty well-known trope that if you're playing a JRPG, the final boss is probably some version of God. This didn't come out of nowhere, however, and the way we got here is actually really fascinating. Have you ever heard the name Friedrich Nietzsche? No? Maybe you've heard this before. God is dead. That was Nietzsche, a German philosopher who had a strong bone to pick with Christianity as what he called a slave religion. To make a long story incredibly short, Nietzsche believed that mankind had outgrown belief in God, and that in order to counter nihilism, man would have to exercise the will to power, to conquer himself, and become an Übermensch, an overman, a sort of superior version of man who is the deciding factor of reality, whom the world revolved around. Does any of this sound familiar? If not, let me zoom in for you. Nietzsche popularized 3 key concepts, which have rippled across Japanese media like you wouldn't believe. First, God is dead. Let's be clear here, Nietzsche didn't celebrate the so-called death of God. He actually worried about the emptiness that would take his place when Christianity declined in Europe. As far as he thought, Christianity had left people with a will to nothingness, desiring to leave this world for the sake of the next. Nietzsche saw this as a poison, which would need to be dealt with by totally rethinking Western philosophy and leading it away from a desire for the supernatural and the afterlife to the here and now. This is how we get our next concept, the will to power. This is power over oneself, and it's what Nietzsche thought was the main driving force in humans. You can summarize it as self-determination, the concept of actualizing one's will unto oneself or one's surroundings, and it overlaps heavily with egoism. If you're familiar with Pelagianism, it's basically a rebranding of it. But then what happens when you exercise that will to power? You get our last concept, the overman, he who overcomes emptiness and despair by creating his own values and asserting his own will to create his own reality, focusing on this life rather than the afterlife. He puts his faith in himself as the ultimate creator and relies on nothing else. Importantly, the Japanese adoption of the overman has historically taken the form of someone who stands above the crowd, ditching the Japanese post-war collective mentality as an act of rebellion against mediocrity. So what are we left with? These 3 concepts come together to form a worldview where there is no God, and everyone who believes in God is being held back from their true potential of becoming God-like if only they would focus on this life instead of the afterlife. Obviously, this worldview isn't exactly friendly to Christianity, given that it originates as a deliberate departure from standard Christian teaching regarding the afterlife, submission to divine authority, and the communion of saints, and therefore, to the Japanese, God appears to be more of a problem to be overcome than a personal and loving creator.
Hold on, I kind of zoned out there for a second because he's describing so much of Nietzsche, and I don't really care because I don't like nihilism. Nihilism is death.
Focus on this life instead of the afterlife. Obviously, this worldview isn't exactly friendly to Christianity, given that it originates as a deliberate departure from standard Christian teaching regarding the afterlife, submission to divine authority, and the communion of saints, and therefore, to the Japanese, God appears to be more of a problem to be overcome than a personal and loving creator. To them, he's a distant and vague figure who sets annoying and pointless rules for us to follow, which is in stark contrast to the Christian understanding, which is
I don't think that that's something that the Japanese actually view. I don't think that that's the Japanese view of God is like very complex and very different. Like, so yeah.
that God sets rules.
Not to mention, it's not even uniform to by and large. There is no Japanese view of fucking God because Japan is like. Japanese religions are centered around Shintoism, some forms of Christianity to some extent, Buddhism, and various other forms of like ancestor worship. And there's some animisms in there. Those are the 4 elements of religion in Japan. Now, Christianity is there, sure. Buddhism and Shintoism are there, sure, but you also have various other older spiritualistic forms. So sorry, no, but that's not... What?
For us to follow, which is in stark contrast to the Christian understanding, which is that God sets rules because he is not a god of chaos, but of order. Speaking of order, Japan isn't a huge fan of organized religion. It's no secret that the evil churches in anime tend to be very Catholic coded. For just one example, the gold and white color palette of these evil religious authorities is very reminiscent of the vestment Catholic priests wear during Christmas and Easter, 2 of the 3 most attended masses every year. That said, if Christianity is around 1% of the Japanese population, why is it that they seem so opposed to organized Christianity specifically? The answer...
For the record, Japan isn't opposed to organized religion. They have organized religion. Christianity is very much supported there, as well as Shintoism and Buddhism. And those are, to a large extent, forms of organized religion. You know, they may be less hierarchical than Christianity is, Buddhism and Shintoism is, in some sense or another. But it's like, they're still organized religions. Come on, man.
Might lie in the rise of new religious movement, otherwise known as cults. Japan has been beset by an onslaught of cults in recent decades. Some of these cults are little more than vaguely religious or ideological social clubs, offering belonging to outcasts and a sense of community to the lonely. But others are significantly more sinister. Probably the most notorious of these new religious movements is the cult Om Shinrikyo, founded by Shoko Asahara. This was a doomsday cult that believed that the world was going to end soon due to a catastrophic war, and so their goal was to survive it by obeying Asahara, building a new world order atop the ashes once the war was over. Asahara made sure to incorporate Buddhism, Hinduism, and even some parts of Christianity into his cult's doctrine. And importantly for us, Asahara was the central authority figure in his cult. The reason for their notoriety is that in 1994 and 1995, Om Shinrikyo carried out 2 deadly attacks in Matsumoto and Tokyo respectively, utilizing chemical weapons. This cult also had a rival cult. Meet Happy Science. I can't say much, given that they're still around and have a track record of silencing people, but what I will say is that their belief system is a more confusing, sloppy, and convoluted mess of Christian, Islamic, and Buddhist syncretism, with their founder at the top of their authority structure as well, a man named Ryoho Okawa. There's a common belief that Happy Science's rivalry with Om Shinrikyo is what accelerated the latter's violent attacks. So, we can clearly see from these cults that organized religion in Japan has gotten a pretty bad rap. You can see the superficial similarities to organized Christianity very easily. The hierarchy, having one guy at the top, rigid rules and doctrines, it's all there. But this is all just about organized Christianity. Surely our unorganized brothers won't cause us any... Oh. So yeah, the third reason for The third reason for evil churches in anime is Japanese Protestantism. Before you get up in arms, I want to clarify that this isn't an attack on anyone nor their faith. I'm only exploring the underlying ideas for why anime has so many evil churches, and I can't ignore the German hammer-wielding elephant in the room, much as I'd like to in the spirit of charity. So how does Protestantism fit into all this? Well, it requires a little bit of history. Bear with me. Between the 1600s and the 1800s, Japan was a closed-off nation under the leadership of the Tokugawa shogunate. Around half a century before the shogunate came to power, missionaries like St. Francis Xavier and other Jesuits had brought Catholic Christianity to Japan. Japan didn't like that, so they closed off Japan from the rest of the world and viciously persecuted and martyred both missionaries and native-born converts. There were many of these, including those martyred during the Great Jenna Martyrdom and the Great Martyrdom of Edo, alongside the Augustan Recollects martyrs, the 16 Dominican martyrs, and a couple hundred others. Those who survived went into hiding and became known as the Kakure Christian, or the Hidden Christians. I would have preferred a cooler name like the Kageno Christian, but I suppose we don't always get what we want. Then came the Meiji Restoration, and with it, Japan opened itself back up to the outside world. When importing all sorts of Western philosophy and technology, Japan found itself receiving an influx of Protestants who embedded themselves into fields like education. Fast forward to World War II, where the heart of Catholicism in Japan for 200 long and arduous years, Nagasaki, was partially destroyed by the United States of America. Soon after, the Allies won the war, and Japan was promptly Americanized. Alongside other aspects of America's culture that entered Japan, a new wave of American Protestantism had arrived. Over time, and to the present day, Japan's small Christian population became majority Protestant. So how does this add to the evil church problem? Well, there's many ways, but I want to hone in on the scandal of schism. Schism is a split between two strongly opposed groups due to differences in opinion or belief. This is how you would define the relationship between Catholics and Protestants.
So far, I'm not really hearing anything at all about churches being a problem because they are corrupt in a lot of ways. The biggest churches are extremely corrupt. Like, and since he's a Catholic, the Catholic protection of pedophilia comes to mind as another aspect of corruption. Well, Catholics are a lot better at this, and while I do like Catholicism a lot more than Protestantism, primarily because Protestantism tends to emphasize suffering for its own sake, in order to be closer to fucking God or some shit like that. And Protestants have this weird fucking tendency, especially evangelical Protestants, to try to embolden suffering, to try to make people that they don't like suffer because they believe that's what God wants to do. Like, they're incredibly corrupt and hypocritical and like just preaching all kinds of shit that goes contrary to the actual teachings of the Bible and whatnot. But I'm not hearing anything that's referencing that, so.
Imagine, if you will, that 1% of your country's population is one religion, but within that 1%, there's a bigger group and a smaller group that refuse to associate with each other. They don't believe all of the same things, they bicker regularly, and they refuse to worship together. Imagine now that the bigger group is part of your education system and they focus more on community. These are well known to you, whereas the smaller group focuses more on more explicitly religious practice, and as a result, they're more of an abnormal curiosity to you. Now, if the bigger group, who you know, and the smaller group, who you don't, have a long-standing opposition to each other, who are you more likely to think is in the right? What about who's wrong? Maybe both of them are wrong. That's the scandal of schism, that it makes Christians look like a bunch of bickering hypocrites who preach love and forgiveness but refuse to reconcile amongst themselves. This likely explains why there's so many religious hypocrites in various anime. There's definitely more ways that the Catholic-Protestant divide impacts how anime perceives the church, such as the accusations of greed levied against the church going all the way back to Martin Luther himself, but I think I've covered the biggest influence overall. So, we've looked at the 3 major reasons for why anime has an evil church problem. These philosophical, cultural, and religious concepts have come together to give Japanese creatives a generally negative impression of organized Christianity, thereby leading many of them to write their fictional churches as corrupt, hypocritical, elitist, and over.
Alright, okay. That's, I'm not gonna bother with this anymore. I'm just gonna go ahead and go through the rest of the channels there. I might check out this one just because I want to see how retarded he sounds. Oh boy, he's getting real ratioed there. Very nice. Well, let's see what other people have to say here, shall we? But eventually the Jesuits have a track record, not with getting into. The Dutch absolutely accelerated it by sending letters confirming the shogun's concerns and adding new ones. Some of them were true, some were false, and the main reasons for it was to muscle the Portuguese out of the market to prevent a Catholic Japan from becoming a potential enemy in the region and in the future. Oh, that's an interesting bit that he didn't even bother mentioning. So let's see here. Something of the world arrives in a city where the corruption is so obvious that even he can see it, but not the people around him. From my experience, the evil church adds up on average. Historic examples speak for themselves up to this day. Okay, yeah. So there are people. So yeah, it doesn't seem like this is a total chud channel, but his views are pretty dumb. They're pretty fucking dumb. Like they're incomplete. In fact, they're even deficient, one would say. So let's go ahead and go into this. I'm not gonna watch it all. I'm just gonna watch it up to a certain point.
I want to say a couple things. Number 1, this was taken from a stream that I did a couple days ago. Number 2, this is not for children. If you are a child, do not watch this. We are talking about very serious, mature topics, and I do not want to scandalize any of you. With that said, onto the video. We're going to be talking about Steam, itch.io, and most recently the UK censoring pornography. I like to open with my own Twitter profile because I tweeted a lot about this in the past day or two. Yesterday I said
all right, let's go back up here. What is he actually talking about? He's not talking about pornography. It's a reference to the simple fact that Steam and other platforms were hit by a censorship effort by the UK to remove lewd and lewd or potentially lewd material, which incidentally ended up applying to a crap ton of other fucking games that weren't even classified as porn, that you couldn't even classify as porn, but just had maybe a little bit of nudity or maybe maybe a side boob was shown, you know, or maybe the characters pose seductively in a couple of scenes here and there and whatnot. You know, it's that kind of shit. So you know, it's not just fucking porn. So already sus.
Feminists have deporned parts of Steam and the entirety of itch.io. Thank you, feminists. Maybe you weren't so bad after all. And you're thinking, wow, you're thinking feminists? And it's like, yeah, I know. I never thought the day would come. But here's the thing. Frankly, they are the
Anti-sex and sex-negative feminists actually exist out there. Like, you've heard of Andrea Dworkin, right? She's an insane fucking retard, but she existed. Sorry, just wanted to...
the only ones who care to do anything about this. One of the accusations that we Christians get when we talk about banning adult content is the notion that we're super simple-minded. We don't think about the nuances. We don't think about consequences. We just want the thing banned, and consequences be darned.
Well, yeah, because if you're going to ban lewd and mischievous content, then we've got to ban the Bible. The Bible has fucking incest, bro. The Bible has elements in which it promotes the raping of women. Like, what is your... Yeah, sorry, bro. That accusation is not only true, it is fucking on point.
But no, that's not at all the case. Like, we are... I would like to think that we're at least somewhat intelligent and we're capable of rational thought.
Well, sorry, but you're not capable of rational thought because you're a retard.
Appreciate being nuanced about this. The feminists have deporned parts of Steam. What did they do? Well, there is this group of feminists that basically they gather together and they advocate for the removal of the objectification of women in media. And so this would be stuff like movies, television, and video games. And so ignoring past controversies, because again, they're feminists. I'm not going to agree with them on everything. Right?
By the way, this was done through the medium of contacting various different payment processors and complaining. If you think, even if you agree with the things that they target, the process of doing it by going through payment processors should be an incredibly chilling effect, because quite literally the payment processing effort to censor your fucking religion, to censor the expression of your religion, can also be used in that same way. But again, you don't understand the nuance.
Frankly, I'm surprised that I agree with them on anything at all. This group of feminists, they essentially they lobbied the payment processors in order to get them to remove the adult content from their from the storefronts that they serve, and so especially targeted were Steam and itch.io. And so Steam, everybody knows Steam, it's the central hub for PC gaming, and Steam had a whole load of games that were delisted. And I cheered. I love that. I love that. 100% I love that. Afterwards came itch.io. And itch.io delisted every single, as far as I know, every single pornographic game on their website. Every single one. That's incredible. It's wonderful. Because itch.io, I don't know if you knew this, .io. The biggest argument that was raised is like, oh, credit card companies shouldn't have this much power, this much authority. Problem is, they already do. I don't know if you remember, but back in 2022, we had the Canadian trucker convoy. And it was a protest against the, I'm going to call it the Wu flu, because I don't know if YouTube still censors it. The Canadian government was requiring that all truckers be injected with the shot for the Wu flu, and they need to be like up to date with it and whatever. And the Canadian truckers didn't want
Very telling that he's referring to COVID as the Wu flu, right?
to do that, and so they eventually converged in the city. Like I forget if it was like Ontario or something. Eventually Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act. And so here, I'm just gonna quote this. In invoking the Emergencies Act, we are broadening the scope of Canada's anti-money laundering and terrorist financing rules so that they cover crowdfunding platforms and the payment service providers they use. These changes cover all forms of transactions, including digital assets such as cryptocurrencies. As of today, a bank or other financial service provider.
Alright, already I'm getting the sense that he doesn't understand the concept of false equivalence, okay? A government wanting its truckers to be vaccinated so they don't internationally spread a fucking disease isn't the same fucking thing at all whatsoever of art. Granted, is incredibly lowbrow and very strange forms of art that barely classify as such, but it is art nonetheless. As art being censored because people are objecting to the objectification of women. Sorry, but yeah, no, this is utterly retarded, and I think I'm just gonna stop here, and I'm not gonna continue on because this guy is a moron. In fact, no surprise at all, to find that the uploader made a video supporting the H.io payment processing censorship. His reasonings, by the way, was a false equivalence between diseases and porn. Yeah. So, anyways, that was kind of a boring stream. Not really much to actually go by. Not really much to say beyond the fact that the guy's retarded. And yeah, I guess the internet, or rather the universe itself, just found a way to prove me wrong. He proved my initial assessment wrong. So, yeah, Piercing Heaven, you're just an idiot.